I believe I've addressed this point several times already, but I've never devoted an actual video to this whole new marketing strategy of Christianity in particular. And that is that it tries to market itself as not being a religion. Now, why would Christians do this? Well, it would be to dissociate themselves from the atrocities committed by religious people in the past. Things like the Inquisition, the Crusades, etc. And with all the baggage that it does carry today, being quite negative in certain aspects. The most common thing I've heard from Christians is that, well, Christianity isn't a religion, it is a relationship, because a religion is man speaking to God, and with Christianity, it's God speaking to man. Unavoidably, definitions are going to be a necessary evil in this video, and I can't really hold back anymore. So I'm going to have to define what is and is not a religion, and I'm going to have to explain not only why I think my definition is useful and applicable, but why I think that Christianity is, in fact, a religion. A religion is a set of beliefs or dogmas on the human nature and the nature of the universe, usually involving the belief and ritualistic worship of a deity or deities. Now, I realize my definition may not be perfect, but I think it would suffice considering how it pretty much encompasses all religious beliefs in the world that have and at one point had existed. So, by this definition, is Christianity a religion? Yes. And I could end the video right here, just like that, but of course, things aren't always that easy. This whole relationship with God could be said of any religion, really. It could be said of Judaism, could be said of Islam, it could even be said of the ancient Egyptian gods like Osiris or Anubis, gods that no one really worships anymore. This relationship was described in ancient scriptures in a similar way. It's not exclusive to Christianity. Second, it's inconsistent with the actual scripture that most Christians tend to worship because it's apparent several times in the Bible that man has to reach out to God before God reaches out to man. Sometimes that's not the case, but there are instances in the Bible where man pretty much had to reach out to God. And is it not the case of Christianity that you have to pray for something to happen first before God may or may not decide to help you with your predicament? Thirdly, it doesn't really make much sense, this relationship between Jesus, God, and, Christians, if you don't know who Jesus and God really are. And that is pretty much the essential core of not only Christianity, but almost all religions on the face of this earth, barring only a few. After all, most religions do have a religious text, and that religious text tends to explain things like God's morality, what God commands you to do, what he likes, what he doesn't like, what punishment awaits you if you do not follow those commands, and what reward awaits you when you do. Christianity makes absolutely no sense if you take all of that away and just replace it with this relationship with God and Jesus. Let me give you an example. Let's just say that a Christian would say something along the lines of, well, Jesus inspires me to be a good, honest, and faithful person. Well, that doesn't really mean anything now, does it, if we don't know who Jesus is? And for us to know who Jesus is, we have to rely on Scripture. And Scripture is a fundamental part of a religion because it is part of the dogma. It's part of the beliefs that form the core of the religion. If we don't know who Jesus is, then the saying that Jesus makes me an honest, faithful, and kind person is meaningless. It does not carry any power. And it would be pretty much equally as valid and, to be quite honest, vapid if I were to say that my imaginary friend Sam told me to be a good and honest person. Which, of course, begs the question of how does one even establish this relationship with God in the first place? It's not like God sends them a direct email or Skype message and says, "Hello, please believe in me." Christians might then argue that God sent them a spiritual message for them to acknowledge his presence. And this usually takes something along the lines of, well, God sent me a miracle and he cured my sick mother, or he found me a job, he found me my wife. Well, two things I have to say to that. And the first is, well, what about those Christians he didn't save? What about those Christians who died miserable, agonizing deaths? Who prayed every day, presumably, who were maybe even better Christians than you were? Why did he send them a message acknowledging his presence? Why didn't he send them a miracle so that they might start a relationship with him? This statement further loses credibility, and by extension, this relationship further loses credibility when Christians say something like, well, I'm being influenced by God's will. Well, what the hell does that mean? It could mean anything from you being inspired to commit mass genocide because God told you to do so, or it could be maybe that you decide to start a charity and to help the sick and the poor. God has commanded both of those sort of types of things on completely opposite ends of the moral spectrum, and yet Christians will always attribute the good things to God. And to finalize my argument, well, what kind of relationship is this in any conventional sense when you're supposed to believe in this deity or this being? You can't even acknowledge its presence because you don't really know it's there, because it doesn't bother to show itself as being there. And indeed, you are not allowed to question if it even exists or not, despite the fact that that's a perfectly reasonable question to ask. And you also can't question it, because that's also a sin. Even if I were to grant Christians that Christianity wasn't a religion, I would still be criticizing it. It doesn't change much for me. I still think it's dangerous. I still think that it is wholeheartedly dishonest in many aspects, and I still think that it should be criticized, and I think I have every right to feel that way. What do you guys think? Is Christianity a religion or not? Feel free to let me know. May the truth always be heard.